Welcome, everybody. Flies in the Vaseline we are. Sometimes it blows my mind. Welcome, everybody, to the second episode of Gen X Wasteland. Here we have, slacker ruminations with universal themes on culture, conspiracy, pop music, rock and roll, and everything else. And of course, you will get heavy doses of high weirdness, Elvis, David Bowie, and all this stuff. So, very excited, and today we've got a nice convo where we're going to go to a lot of places, and of course you can participate too if you want to call in and give us your questions or your own views, or even if we see something interesting in the chat, we will try to pick you up. So yes, my name is Miguel Connor, author of The Occult Elvis, out a week from Tuesday, and I'm very excited. And just finishing up the first draft on the Gnostic David Bowie, which I'm very excited about. Elvis and Bowie are almost connected to the hip. And I don't know if it's my Clark Kent or superhero identity. I am the host of Aeon Byte. This is being streamed through Aeon Byte and its channels. But next week we will start shifting, keep them separated, as the Offspring sang, and I will be on my own channel with Gen X and Substack. You can now get Gen X Wasteland on iTunes and Spotify's and your favorite podcast provider. So check it out and let's do this. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Dr. Cherlyn Jones, an individual who I love her ideas, but even better, she is amazing to hang out with. It's rare, but it's always nice to hang out with a person. And I've had a lot of fun with her. My wife, and I were up. Well, they were drinking. I was not. And had some incredible conversations. And she's just, a very cool cat. Cherlyn, thanks for coming on and glad to see you here.
Thank you, Miguel. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Good deal. Good deal. And also with us, we've got Paul Wyld. He was on Aeon Byte, and he is the author of a book that I feel is very important, and that is Jim Morrison, Secret Teacher of the Occult. Paul, thanks for coming back, or thanks for being here in the first one.
Thank you very much for having me back again. This is great.
Good to see you. And with us, too, we've got Ray, or Doc Rehab. Ray, thanks for being here. How are you doing?
Doing well, man. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I saw you earlier doing Bob's podcast. How did Wise as Serpents go?
Oh, it went well, but we didn't get any guests on there. Hopefully this next week we'll get some guests to come on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always fun to see. Again, having these conversations, it's always a blast. So that's what we do here too. Well, first let's talk about you. I've been doing so many podcasts lately, both for Aeon Byte and to support the Occult Elvis. Very fortunate. I've been on Whitley Strieber's podcast, New Thinking Aloud. A lot of very cool podcasts I've been on. I was on The Whole Rabbit, and I'm excited about that because that's a really big growing podcast. Very cool cats, and they're basically all millennials and Gen Z, and they're all gaga about Elvis, thousands of them. So it's good that's why my voice is kind of failing. But Cherlyn, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and who thou art.
Oh, I'm just generation. I'm a Gen Xer. That'll just define.
That's all you need.
Yeah, that's it. Those are my creds.
Yeah, typical. It's like I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
Take it or leave it.
Exactly. Well, I've had a lot of unorthodox journeys, but I have a nonprofit veteran service organization that was born out of sort of my explorations into this interrelationship between the warrior and the shaman archetype. And when I was in graduate school, it kind of had coincided with when the Iraq War came around, and I was so outraged, but having to follow Jung, realized that if I didn't know this archetype, then I was just living it through projection and was remaining really unconscious for me. And so decided to get to know our warriors. My dad was a Vietnam veteran, and that's going to lead into some of my Gen X stories. But other than my dad, I didn't know anyone who was in the military or had ever been in the military. And again, another point of connection with the Gen X theme was that they never talked about that. You know, everybody just wanted that stuff to be over with, you know. I don't even think I knew what the Vietnam War was until I was in junior high school, honestly. You know, like no one talked about it. But anyhow, so that sort of led me to really taking a deliberate look at, or trying to get to know who our warriors were and what was motivating them, because, you know, you're not going to get rid of this archetype, nor should you. And then that led me to this sort of discovery through the work of Campbell and others of this interrelationship, as I said, but with the warrior and the shaman, that there's an external fight, but there's an internal fight. The external fight's the analog for the internal. And so through a lot of different journeys, volunteered with and then worked for the military and a medical and then a deployed capacity in Afghanistan, and always looking for ways to sort of bring these stories, these archetypal and mythical stories into their journeys of healing and homecoming. So for the past few years with my nonprofit, that's what I've been doing, is, you know, working on a number of different projects, but always trying to figure out ways where we can find a channel for both of these archetypes to interrelate. And it's really interesting because I was listening to your interview with Paul just recently, and I had just gotten to the point where you started talking about Jim Morrison taking on this warrior aspect of his self to fight for, I think it was in relationship with, I can't remember exactly. It was after, you know, he wasn't a child, but this aspect of him that was taking on, you know, there are things that he needed to fight for. So he wasn't only just this shamanic teacher, but he felt like this mission to fight for what was right. And so I'm like, I'm just getting to the good part, you know, and I had to go on. But it just kind of confirmed my idea, and I'm certainly not the first one to put it forth, that these two archetypes are very closely conjoined, and you're going to have a really unhealthy society if they're not in conversation. So I've been doing a series of lectures, or I hate that word, the L word, talks, public talks, here at the University of Montana regarding this archetype of the warrior across time, and looking at, you know, the first one I did was looking at the twin hero myths in Navajo culture. Then last night, actually, we did Parzival and the Grail Quest, which was a big one. It's one of my favorite stories, but, you know, forgotten that it's a story that takes place on 3 continents with over 200 characters and hits about every single genre there is. So that was a small one. So I was really looking forward to this podcast where I didn't have to write and into about 40 books. And I look forward to hearing what Paul has to say. And synchronistically enough, you know, the Doors were one of my first introductions to anything. You know, I grew up in a world where people didn't talk about anything that wasn't already plainly understood. And I could say more about that. But I had an older cousin who was, I heard Chris say in the last one, this idea of generation, what do you call it? Generation Jones? Is that what he called it?
Yeah, like right before Gen.
The boomers and I had an older cousin that would fit into those years. And he was the coolest person that ever lived, right? He introduced me to music at a young age, and the Doors were one of them. And so I had I bought when I was a teenager, I would just listen to the Doors like nonstop, and bought the vinyl album. You had Jim Morrison posters, and bought the vinyl of An American Prayer, and would listen to this. And I'm like, what in the hell is this? This is crazy. And it's so good. So I look forward to hearing more about, you know, your work with that, Paul. But that's me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And thanks for what you're doing, because it's important we get the warrior archetype, especially how the veterans are doing today, completely neglected, how men are not initiated or taught the higher mysteries and all that. So glad you're doing what you're doing. So Paul, tell us about yourself, or tell us about Jim Morrison and his idea of the warrior, or what do you think?
Yes. You know, when you start talking about Jim Morrison, in relationship with the Western esoteric tradition and the angle that I chose to view his life from, because I really felt that I wanted to portray him as a secret teacher, because when I read Gary Lachman's The Secret Teachers of the Western World, I just kept thinking about Jim Morrison to the point that it was just overwhelming. And I had his book, and with the notes on every page, like JM, 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 like, wow, like this is compelling. Like we all know that Jim Morrison is a lot more than a rock star. And I felt like I had found for myself at the time, like a big piece of that puzzle as to why we feel this way about him. Now we know that he's a very, very old soul, and that he's speaking to us, to some real primitive part of ourselves, like something that's real deep within that just wants to come alive again, which is what happened around the world in the 1960s, because that was the great, occult awakening at that time. But now that the book has been out now for 6 months, and I'm, the whole energy of writing the book and getting it published has come and gone, I feel like what Colin Wilson felt after he published The Occult in 1971, that he's even more mystified than ever, by the entire subject. And that's how I feel about Jim Morrison. I still have, as you put it in your podcast a few days ago, I'm still getting downloads, I'm still processing a lot of things. I've done other podcasts, and there's other things that have come up, and it's almost like I need to write a part 2 or something like that. Right? But just to go into this conversation for your viewers, that the first thing that we have to know about Jim Morrison is this is somebody who put a lot of faith in the power of words. Like Jim Morrison loved poetry. He was a poet. He was a beautiful poet, a fantastic poet. And when we talk about Jim Morrison and his work, it's in the same line when we talk about The Flowers of Evil by Charles Baudelaire, or Illuminations or A Season in Hell by Arthur Rimbaud, or Howl in all his work by Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac, and the essays and poems of Antonin Artaud. These are the poets and the writers and the novelists that informed Jim Morrison's imagination, and really clued him in as to what he wanted to be later on in life. Now when we go into the secret teacher aspect, that's the core of him. Like Jim Morrison has like contributions in a lot of different ways. He was a great rock star, and he was a great lyricist, and he was a great poet, and he was an excellent experimental filmmaker. That was his original love. He went to UCLA to study filmmaking, to be an avant-garde filmmaker. He wanted to move to New York after that to work with Jonas Mekas, who's considered the godfather of experimental filmmaking here in the United States. So he has, in all these places, he has these contributions. But I began to realize that at the core of that is his secret teacher self, that is very much in connection with his poems to start my book off, where he says that reality is what has been concealed from us for so long. And Jim Morrison seemed to have made it his mission in a very warrior-like way that has a connection to in an Alexander the Great kind of way, to show us what this reality is, to show this part of life, to move us up into cosmic consciousness. And he felt really called to do that. And he dedicated himself to that in the same way that his father, who was an admiral in the Navy, dedicated himself to protecting the United States of America. Like he had a lot in common with his father that way. So anyway, when we talk about Jim Morrison in the Western esoteric tradition, we have to keep in mind that the Western esoteric tradition flowed through him powerfully, and it has all these fantastic tributaries coming off of it that are spiritually, artistically, and intellectually very rich. I'm just amazed at just how much this young person was able to understand. And I realized that around age 21, he graduated. This is someone who had the intellectual capacity of a 40 or 50-year-old with a PhD. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you read his poetry, the way he's writing about, like just in The Lords and the New Creatures, the notes on vision, always really astute, observations about alchemy and alchemy's relationship to cinema, about history, about shamanism in the end. At the end of Notes on Vision, we discuss shamanism. You get the feeling that it's almost like it's occurring to him as a new thought that shamanism is is like a solution to healing in art, and something that he would go into. In an interview, he said later on that when he wrote Notes on Vision, he was talking about shamanism. He didn't realize that he would be doing that, just a few years later.
Wasn't he? Oh, I'm sorry. Wasn't he like a student of like Carlos Castaneda? I can't remember his name.
He was.
Yeah.
He did like to read Carlos Castaneda. Castaneda was teaching at UCLA when Jim Morrison was there. I haven't been able to find any evidence that they took classes or that, but I do know that he read Carlos Castaneda a lot. Jim Morrison's friends that he hung around with, like Phil Olino and Dennis Jacob and Frank Lisandro and Ray Manzarek that he met at film school, they all liked Castaneda a lot. And some of Jim Morrison's friends that were going down to South America to try peyote and those other things, they would come back with their stories, which, very much related to what Castaneda discusses, with experiences with peyote in his works. I mean, Jim Morrison was all ears. Like he was, he really wanted to know what their experiences were like, because he was approaching that place when he was going to move to Venice Beach and begin to seriously dive into psychedelics at that time. So he was into Castaneda. Also, here in Santa Monica, there's a place called Thunderbolt Books that Carlos Castaneda used to give lectures up there, like a couple of blocks away from where the Doors first had their, when Jim Morrison first sang with Ray Manzarek. Yeah, Castaneda definitely a part of Jim Morrison's influences.
He had a lot of incredible influence, and like you're right, his IQ was like 150. Just a very smart, talented individual. Surely one of our modern rock shamans. And as we were talking before, he loved Colin Wilson, and Wilson talk about Faculty X, and here we are, Gen X. So I don't know if there's a connection, but and you're right. I think in this day and age, I think books don't end, like you said, with podcasts, with blog posts, and social media. It's almost they come alive. I'm getting emails from people. I am getting downloads. It's almost like it's a living, breathing thing. So it's a great time to be alive. That's for sure. I'm going to put, here's a call-in number. If you have any questions for us people, please call and Ray will get to you. So what do you think, Cherlyn? I guess, obviously Jim Morrison had a huge impact on our generation and future generations. And we can go down the list. We can talk about individuals like Iggy Pop and Joy Division and Pearl Jam and Scott Weiland of Stone Temple Pilots. People accused him of ripping off Eddie Vedder, but it was all Jim Morrison. A huge influence. Patti Smith, just an incredible influence on so many luminaries of rock and everything else. But what do you think defines Gen X, or what defines Gen X for you in your life?
Well, it's funny because I was going to say, Miguel, you're going to have to rein us in, because I really want to go down this tangent of
yeah, sure.
The shaman, know more about Jim Morrison. And when you mentioned, Paul, you mentioned Alexander the Great, I've been doing some research into him. I started studying ancient Greek last year because I figured I wanted to, this book that I'm working on, I figured out I needed to know Greek before I could actually say anything about Greek. And then that carried me on a whole other thing. In the interview, I heard you mention T.E. Lawrence. I just got done reading 7 Pillars of Wisdom, which blew the top of my brain off. Just realizing what this person had done, had accomplished. And he's mentioned explicitly by a man named Leo Braudy, who wrote a book called Chivalry and Terror, War and the Changing Nature of Masculinity from Chivalry to Terrorism. And he cites Lawrence as the person that sort of brought back this ideal of the knightly adventurer, which had kind of been lost. So there's so many rabbit holes we could go down. And my next talk is about hero healers of the ancient world, which I'm going to get into Alexander and Lawrence and all. Anyway, but if that could be that could be an Aeon Bite show.
But, we can go down that path. I'm fine to hear. Yeah, healing and shamanism.
There's plenty to say just about Gen X, though, and these, the influences on Gen X, because I think that, one thing that intersects here is that I feel like when I was growing up and as I think, Paul, you're pointing out, there's this big literary influence on these people, and especially on Morrison. When I was coming up, when I was learning about all this music, which I always was looking at the alternative music, the independent music, because I knew something was wrong. I knew that they were lying to me. I just didn't know what it was about. It took me a minute to figure it out, but I knew. I can remember asking my mom when I was very young, what's the real part? And she said, what do you mean, what's the real part? And I said, well, I go to bed and you turn the lights out, and then there's that part. And then I get up in the day and there's this part. I mean, I was never felt like they weren't separated to me. I was awake during my dream. You know what I mean? I was talking about dreaming. I didn't know I didn't know the word, right? I just knew that it was as real to me as when I woke up. And she's like, oh, you mean when you dream? And I was like, well, yeah, but it's just like this. She said, no, it isn't. I said, no, it is. Like no one could convince me that all this other stuff wasn't real. And so I figured out from a really early age that I was living in a different reality than the people around me, that then they weren't going to acknowledge it, and had a lot of really interesting, whether it's high strange or spiritual, visionary, whatever experiences, but just, that I knew that something was amiss, right? And so I was always looking at the alternative music, the different aspects of culture. And but my point in saying that, or one of the points, is that for me at that time, learning about music wasn't separated from literature and learning. And you know what I mean? They went together. Well, this record is related to this book, and this artist is influenced by this writer. Like all of those things came together. And I feel like that sort of ended with with Generation X. I don't see that now, I didn't see that in the millennial culture coming afterwards. But to me, it was really connected. If you were a thinker, if you were spiritually aware, you were looking at different kinds of music. You were looking at the music and the books, and like they all fell together. Not that everybody in Generation X was doing that, but I felt like it was unique to our generation, or maybe that we were the last one, because clearly, people like Morrison were doing it, and the Beats and everybody else. But I feel like that it kind of just died out, and maybe that's just the influence of the internet or technology or what dumbing down, the fluorides there. I'm not sure, but
we were doing it, but we're also the first generation to be introduced to computers. So we had all that, but we were also taking in all the electronic and cyberspace stuff at the same time.
Yeah, well, we did both, right? For us, because we weren't habituated from birth to that. I mean, this is how I see it, that the technology came in and it was a tool to add on to all these other things. It wasn't to replace it, because they're not the same. They're different.
No, it was pretty shitty back then to replace it, dial up and all that. Yeah.
Well, to me, it still is, and I've just been really heartened recently, as I said, doing these talks, which I didn't know how it was going to go. I just felt like, this is time. People need to hear these stories. They need to engage, and so I did almost no social media. It's an in-person event. You're not getting anything for free. I'm not feeding you. We're going to talk. You're going to learn something. And to have people show up, give their time on a Friday night. There's been young people, older people, like a really good. And I thought, I think this is the moment that they've kind of reached that, we're at the dead end, I feel like, of this arc that I'm saying, with our generation, it sort of ended, at least in this popular culture, where the literary and the musical and the technological, there weren't all these hard separations between them. And we've had sort of 25 years of just this technological wasteland where things have just been degraded. And I think it's maybe finally reached a point where people are saying, you know what, I want to go hear someone tell me a story. I want to go hear a person tell me a story. I think that sounds good on a Friday night, you have to reach the end of something to make that decision. But yeah, I feel like that's unique to us.
For sure, for sure. What do you think, Paul? Healing, shamanism, we need it more than ever. We need Morrison more than ever, or what do you think?
Oh, I agree. We need stories. That's, I mean, Jim Morrison, the one who said that, you know, the only thing that survives the downfalls of civilizations are their poems, their their songs, you know, their myths, you know, that transcends history,
Oh yeah, for
right?
sure.
Um,
Are you there, Paul, or did
we,
we lose you?
no, I'm here.
Oh,
Um,
okay. I
this
lost.
this book was really important to Jim Morrison because it talks about, you know, why, well, Colin Wilson was fascinated as to why romantics have such high highs and low lows. He talks about Van Gogh and people like that. He also talks about T.E. Lawrence, and he goes specifically into the Arab Revolt from 1916 to 1918, which is what the film was about. So the film comes out in 1962, and I'm sure because Jim Morrison read the book and read what Colin Wilson had to say about T.E. Lawrence and the Arab Revolt, he wanted to see this film. I first saw this film, and I felt after reading Secret Teachers, The Western World, that Jim Morrison's seen this film and inspired him. The dialogue in this movie, the scenes in this film, this character in this movie, what's going on is informing everything about Jim Morrison. It informs a lot about the 1960s. It comes out in the same year that the Rolling Stones are formed. I love this film also, and so did Mick Jagger. So I found someone that went to school with Jim Morrison at UCLA, and they wanted to be, you know, they wanted to remain anonymous in talking about all of this, but they did confirm that Jim Morrison did see this film and that he was quite influenced by it. You know, this is, it goes out into the desert, and they transform themselves, and you know, they become a warrior to, like, you know, to free the Ottoman Turks. And that he, you know, the whole garb, the whole changing of the dress, you know, that happened to Jim Morrison as well, where, you know, his, you know, all of his clothing changed, and he came up with the whole Lizard King idea with, like, with the black leather pants and everything like that. And it's a very beautiful, epic, you know, elegant movie. And it's, The Doors the same way. It's a very beautiful, epic, you know, elegant band, you know, with the way Jim Morrison looked, and with the music, and how amazing it is and how timeless it is, in the same way that Lawrence of Arabia is, like, you know, is so very timeless as well. But in this film, it's actually a really esoteric film about this man who goes out into the desert. He goes through very tough experiences, you know, to earn the respect and the trust and the admiration, and, you know, of the tribes that he brings together as he fights the Turks, right? And he tries to fend off Western civilization from taking that over. You know, we're seeing all that play out right now still. Like, we just saw, you know, Damascus overrun like a month ago, in the same way that Damascus was, like, you know, overrun by T.E. Lawrence when he took it over, right? This is all repeating itself. So, you know, it's the same thing. So Jim Morrison was greatly inspired by the real life T.E. Lawrence, by the film, and by the way Colin Wilson introduced T.E. Lawrence, you know, in The Outsider. And to tie also into The Outsider, Jim Morrison was a classic romantic. And with these romantics that Colin Wilson talked about, with these high highs, these low lows, these high highs, these peak experiences, in which a lot of them would, you know, get into drugs and suicide and all that after that, because they would crash. You know, Jim Morrison was the same person. Robert Krieger talks about a night when Jim Morrison was suicidal, and he was at the home that Robert Krieger shared with John Densmore. And they spent all night trying to talk him out of taking his life. And Robert Krieger says that they had to do that a few times. And then at the end of the night, before the sun came up, Jim Morrison went to take a walk, and he came back a completely different person. That the person that wanted to take his life out, you know, just an hour or two ago, disappeared completely. And he came back with all the lyrics for "People Are Strange," and he went from this low low to this real high peak experience, and heard this song in his mind. So I can see why Jim Morrison liked The Outsider a lot, because he could identify with the artists and the people and the visionaries that Colin Wilson was talking about. It's a very important thing to understand about Jim Morrison. He's a very sensitive individual. He had a lot of things that were driving him. I can see why Val Kilmer said after playing him, like, you would not want to be him,
Not at all.
Well, it
And
seems to me too
go
that,
ahead.
well, the depth of the art that we're talking about, with Morrison, with these other folks that flooded into the culture. Well, they weren't all as deep as the Doors. We have the whole Laurel Canyon aspect of, lots of music being played by one set of session musicians, but nevertheless, I mean, there was definitely an instantiation into the culture of some incredibly deep ideas and some really rich, as you said, this esoteric tradition. And I feel like with our parents, with the boomer generation being so divided, so you have this tradition coming in and it's coming in and you can't stop it, right? You can't put the genie back in the bottle, but you can put the genie in front of a television, and feed them really horrible food, right? And make sure that they're distracted, they're diverted, right? How do you get somebody off the path through these diversions? And so I feel like our parents' generation was so traumatized by that split in the culture. I'm going to have to plug my computer here in a second, but they were so traumatized by that. Everybody, like I said, everybody just wanted to forget,
Mm-hmm.
My parents were hawks. I didn't even know what hippies were. I didn't even know what the war was. Like, everyone just wanted to forget. If you were on the hawk side, you lost a war. It was shameful. It was, it was an embarrassment for you, a disgrace. And if you were on the hippie side, well, now you have to make money. So what, are you going to stay in your commune or are you going to go get a job? So the hippies become the yuppies. And it was just absolutely traumatizing, right? This thing you just forget. And so now, we're the generation that was put in front of a television, the latchkey kid. We were just distracted to death, to forget the things that were coming in, that were flooding into our consciousness, into the consciousness of the world, like the work of Morrison and others. I feel like it was a concerted attempt by, I can't tell you their names, but by the archons, right? To put that down and to make that go away, to flood us with all manner of, entertainment, distractions, trauma. I mean, I just remember as a kid, the movies on TV, and it was just like tornadoes, volcanoes, nuclear winter, just like everything was about to end all the time. How can it always be about to end all the time? But then it was, the Saturday morning cartoons and the sugar and I grew up in Florida, right? So it was the constant, the entertainment part of it, the theme parks. So just this really, but there's something lurking in the background of what had just happened to our culture, this trauma that it had endured, all of this beautiful spiritual knowledge that had flooded in, it was all there. And then, so these things were really in conflict, I feel like, with our generation. I'm just going to plug my computer in.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, no, that's really well said. The manipulation, the mass media. What did Philip K. Dick said? If God was going to appear, he would have to appear in a commercial because that's the only way humanity would catch him. And the God in the gutter. And yes, they've been using mass media tools and control on us and different generations in different ways. The game hasn't really changed, and I believe Dune is based on Lawrence of Arabia, right, Paul? I'm pretty sure it's
I think so. I'm sure that's the case, but that's a new idea to me.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
and what you guys are with the distractions, that just, you can blame the ancient Romans for that. They were the ones like just give them bread and circuses, right? So
right.
We can do things and just distract them, and they can all have a great time. Jim Morrison understood that a great deal. He saw the power of television with his generation, in the 1950s, and what it would, in the same way that David Bowie was just so astute about what the internet would do to us in the future. And here we are, everything he said, right? Everything Jim Morrison said about where television was going, that all came true, right? So, but Jim Morrison was he wanted to get away from all of that. This is somebody who, in their secret teacher self, their outsider person, like they needed to go to the edge of society in order for them, to be born, for him to become, his shaman, poet, warrior self.
Mm-hmm.
That takes place out on Venice Beach. He graduates from UCLA. He's confronted with all kinds of choices. His father expected him to go into Hollywood. Jim Morrison hated Hollywood. He told his friend Bill Cosgrave, who one night was going to sneak into the Academy Awards, like, what the fuck you doing that for? Like, Hollywood is here for the masses. Like, Jim Morrison just hated all of that. And then, of course, like I said, he contemplated going to New York City to work with Jonas Mekas, but in an interview he said he didn't see himself like taking care of film equipment and all that kind of stuff. Also, I think just the idea, like, you live in New York City, you've got to have a place to live and a job, because the cold here in California, you can just like go to the beach, right, and just crash on the beach, just what he did for a while under the Santa Monica Pier. Also, he was classified A1 for the draft. He graduated, and this scared the shit out of him, to be drafted and to go to Vietnam. That's just the last place in the world. So John Densmore took him to the induction center, and somehow he got out of it. He really pulled one on them to get out of it. And then he had to go back to UCLA to enroll into a bunch of classes to prove to them that he was still in UCLA. It kind of reminds me of when Dostoevsky was put in front of a firing squad. At the last minute, he had that reprieve. Right. Before that happened, Dostoevsky was a nothing mediocre writer. After that happened, he became the world's greatest novelist. After this experience where like Jim Morrison comes very, very close to getting drafted and sent to Vietnam, he goes on and does everything with the Doors. It's almost like the experience is like I have no more time to waste. Like I just almost lost my life in all of this. So that's what's going on. Also, Mary Werbelow, this woman that he really, really loved, she dumped him. She was like, all you know are books. You don't know anything about life. You need to go find yourself. And there's a lot more to that story. But that was a very painful breakup for Jim Morrison. I think she probably felt that when his parents cut him off from like paying his rent and stuff like that at UCLA, that he was going to move in with her or something like that. She's like, no, that's not happening. So Jim Morrison went to go live under the Santa Monica Pier. And he went, the breakup was people when Bill Cosgrave, his friend, Bill Cosgrave he wrote a book, Jim Morrison, Mary and Me, which is a really good portrait of Jim Morrison from a very personal friendship point of view with the three of them. That when he saw Jim Morrison on the beach, like he was just destitute, like he was just like down in the dumps. He was also getting high a lot and writing in his notebooks, and his mind was opening up, at the same time. I mean, the end is originally written in response, like his pain from the breakup with Mary Werbelow. So, and then from underneath the Santa Monica Pier, he was living on Dennis Jacobs' rooftop, and then that's when the transformation happened. And this is a very important point of Jim Morrison's life, because this is where he's at a place where every secret teacher has to, from what I see, is that they have to ask themselves, like, how am I going to fit in society? Like, who am I? Like, where do I fit with who I am, and what is my mission? Because I'm not going to go get a job. I'm not going to Hollywood. I'm not going to New York. I'm not doing these things, And so he begins to open himself up and write in his notebooks, and you can get LSD over the counter, and he's taking it like a madman. And it's the emergence of shamanism with the whole symbolist notion from Arthur Rimbaud's letter to Paul Demeny that, a poet should make himself a visionary through a derangement of all the senses. Of course, that has like a very close relationship with shamanism, because you're really opening up your mind and disorganizing your senses. You're getting in contact with the spiritual. So he's at a place where, like, I need to go this is who I am, and I need to go be myself. I need to communicate through my art, through my poetry, through who I am, this connection that I have with this other reality. I'm a deeply spiritual person. And he very astutely sees that rock and roll is the perfect art form, because it has its roots in the primitive, to express that which is shamanistic. So the secret teacher core of him, the shaman in him, it comes out and it's expressed through rock music, through lyrics that are heavily influenced by symbolist poetry. And then he's very influenced by Antonin Artaud with the theory of cruelty and how you shock the audience, you involve the audience. And Jim Morrison saw that he could appropriate that approach to drama with rock music when he's out there screaming at you to wake up. Like, he wants to jar you awake. He wants to take you out of your complacency. Colin Wilson, talks about this, in a lot of his books, how you have to jar away to get away from something called the robot. Mm-hmm. Gary Lachman talks about that when in his biography with on Colin Wilson called Beyond the Robot. So that's where Jim Morrison was when he left UCLA. He asked himself some, in my opinion, some pretty tough questions about what he was going to do. And that's a pattern with all the secret teachers, like down to the Western esoteric tradition. They have to get to a place where they've got to come in contact with that warrior side of themselves, because they're born to go out there and tell us that there is another reality. And this is a very vital part of life. And throughout the past 2,000 years, it's like places and people and leaders will accept this kind of person, and then it's the opposite. They won't accept this kind of person. This person will be persecuted and put in jail and all that kind of stuff. Same thing happened to Jim Morrison. They were looking for a way to get him in jail. They found that in Miami. They convicted him of something that he did not do. 10,000 pictures submitted at that trial. Not one showed him exposing himself. Every eyewitness could not remember him exposing himself. Yet a 3-man, 3-woman jury in the most conservative city in the United States convicted him. 6 months of hard labor. You're going to Rayford. This scared the shit out of Jim Morrison. And if there's any let's see, legitimacy of the argument that he disappeared, it would be that. Like, because he was telling his friends he was in Paris, like, I need some kind of assurance that when I go back to the United States, that if I lose on appeal, I'm not going to get put in Rayford prison, or I might not walk out of there. And I really think that was the goal, was to get him into place to set him up to be killed. Because there are too, I go into this at length in the book, there are too many details, there are too many things that match up to what has been, what they've tried to do to other secret teachers in the Western esoteric tradition. I'm sure Jim Morrison was probably familiar with the life of Giordano Bruno. He was a 16th century occultist secret teacher himself during the Renaissance. He left Italy in the late 1580s. He came back in the early 1590s thinking that they'd forgotten about who he was, or maybe all the controversy about his ideas had blown over. He had been traveling around Europe, and he found patronage and people that were very welcoming to him, welcoming to what he had to say, so he could get his work done. And he took a gamble. He went back to Italy, and with his rambunctious personality, he fell out with the patron there in Venice. They arrested him. They took him back to Rome. They imprisoned him for 6 years under the Pope's order. And in 1600, they burned him to the stake. This is the exact same thing that's going through Jim Morrison's mind when he's in Paris. He's like, what's going to happen to me if I make a decision to go back to the United States? So I'm sure, he was contemplating ways where he could be disappeared. That's a possibility for sure. And that's why he would have done that. It's strange, when he's in Paris, he's living in Oscar Wilde's room where he died when he first got there. Wow. He's buried in the same cemetery with Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde went for Paris for similar reasons that Jim Morrison did. Oscar Wilde was put in prison for 2 years, and it destroyed his health. And he went back to Paris in the hopes of regaining his life back, which is exactly why Jim Morrison went to Paris. He wanted to get back in touch with himself again, and get back in touch with his poet self and all that. That didn't happen. It didn't happen for Oscar Wilde either. A famous quote is really nasty. And Oscar Wilde never recovered. He passed away in Paris. Then, after Jim Morrison went to Paris, he's in Oscar Wilde's room, like he joins Oscar Wilde in the same cemetery, Père Lachaise, if indeed he's actually buried there. Bill Siddons, the door's manager, Ray Manzarek flew to Paris to be on top of things during the whole death incident. And Bill Siddons called, Ray Manzarek back up and said, to tell him about situation. And Raymond Derek was like, "You see the body?" And I was like, "No, I Bob really often like there was a desert and everything." So Raymond Derek was like, "So basically, we might have buried." It was very general. And I think what's in the ballpark of the truth with all of that is, if Jim Morrison was given heroin, there's lots there to say that he did. A lot of people who were with him at the Rock and Roll Circus that night, they left the country afraid that they were going to get hooked up with Jim Morrison's death because they were into heroin, like Pamela's boyfriend Jean de Bertouilly, a French count. Well, first of all, Pamela told the police that there was no next of kin, so that really advanced them to be able to bury him really fast.
Right.
So to bury him really fast is to lessen the time frame, which the police would be like, well, maybe we should do an autopsy. Because if they did an autopsy and they found heroin, that's going to open up an investigation. That's going to point to Pamela, and that she could be culpable, for his death. I'm sure all that was going on. I'm sure Agnes Varda, the filmmaker who was friends with them, was probably telling her that to Pamela, like, listen, we need to bury this body, and you need to get out of this country. So I think that's why I think that's why things happened very fast. I mean, his parents weren't even contacted because they were trying to save Pamela from a possible criminal prosecution, and maybe criminal prosecution from other people. Just let's get this done. But John Densmore does say that if there's anybody who could pull a disappearing act, like Arthur Rimbaud, his big hero who disappeared to Africa, it would be Jim Morrison. But you know what? That Feast of Friends documentary that they were making, that Harrison Ford was actually on as well at the time, that a lot of people don't know. You can see Harrison Ford like in some of the videos with Jim Morrison at that time. And they're in the back of a car with Jim Morrison's in the back of a car with Ray Manzarek, and the documentary filmmaker's like, hey, what do you want to communicate to the audience? What do you want the effect of the audience to be with this documentary? And Jim Morrison's like, I hope it leaves them puzzled. And Ray Manzarek was like, puzzled, that's a good word. So, everything in Jim Morrison's life is mysterious. His death is puzzling. It's going to remain so for a long time. This person is a secret teacher, just like all the rest of the Western esoteric tradition. And we're going to be talking about him for centuries this way, because he was occupied with all the same things. And he expressed all these, that connection with the other reality, through the genius of his lyrics and his poetry. In his person. Look at the impact that he has now, like 50 years later after his death.
It's huge.
It's interesting, because when I was listening to your show, or that you did with Miguel, and you mentioned Rayford. So I grew up in Florida, and Rayford's like the boogeyman word.
Me too. I'm from Coral Gables in Miami.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I grew up in Bradenton over near Tampa, and then Orlando. But, the Rayford was like, oh, you're going to go to Rayford, like, wow, I didn't realize that was the threat there. I vaguely remembered it happened in Miami. I think, because I had I have two grown sons. I also have a 9-year-old, but I have my older sons when I was quite young, and my life shifted, took a hard turn at that point. And I sort of forgot that whole Doors part of my life. And then when the Doors movie came out, I couldn't like the Val Kilmer smirk. I'm like, no, that's not Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison is this.
So Mary Werbelow, his girlfriend, saw this film, and she told Bill Cosgrave that was only 30% of Jim.
Yeah, I heard you say that, and I'm glad I was like, okay, I feel confirmed. I'm not just a total snob. I just couldn't, I'm like, this figure has so much depth to me. I can't watch this cartoonish characterization. But one thing,
Ray Manzarek hated it. Like Ray Manzarek, got into a screaming match with Oliver Stone. Like, that's not my friend. Like, you're making a movie that is a complete distortion of someone that means a lot to me. And Oliver Stone had him banned from the set.
Yeah, I can totally see that. But it does feel like a confirmation to me that I was right. But I wanted to say that, when we said Rayford and then Joe and the Doors, and what happened there with him in Florida, and because I've always thought this, Florida is this microcosm of the weirdness that's gone on in this country. And as it relates to Gen X, okay, so if you look at the passing away of all of these shamans, I would say popular in the sense of surface, but popular sense of the well known. So Elvis, Morrison, that happened. And then I feel like, you know, with quote, our generation, we had to look back to them. We didn't have many new poets. We didn't have any, you know, we didn't have these original sort of shamans that were bringing this forward. And then we had all these distractions of the pop culture. And again, Florida being this weird microcosm of, and I feel like we can all look at that, the microcosm of our own lives, you know, being exemplary of our generation or our time period. But when I was a child, I remember I think, Miguel, I may have told you this story, but my Elvis was coming to play in Tampa in 1977. He was scheduled to play in late September. And I was very young, but I was aware. And oh my God, Elvis is coming, you know, I mean, can we go see him? And my parents said, yeah, we're going to go see him, you know, and then he dies.
Oh, yes, you told me, yeah.
You know, it's just kind of in keeping with, you know, they're just gone and you don't know why, you don't know what happened. But yeah, Elvis died, you know, before he played in Florida. I don't know where you were, Paul, but I was actually, you know, we were close enough. We watched the Challenger explode in the air, you know.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Wow.
So you feel like you're living in a TV show when you're, you know, Ted Bundy was in Florida, Adam Walsh was my age. You feel like you're in the TV show somehow.
Right.
So it's
I mean, growing up in Miami was like.
Was the Menendez brothers in Florida? Or was that California?
That's California.
Oh, that's okay, California. Well. That's in Van Nuys up in the valley.
Okay, never mind.
But it seems like it could be Florida, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the Menendez, they're Cuban, yeah, all that.
The cereal capital.
I mean, I was born October 7, 1970, and like right down the road from, at the exact same time that they were on fire. And I first was introduced to Jim Morrison by my brother in 1983, and I love the Doors. And you know, growing up in Miami for somebody like me, because I'm a spiritual individual, and I'm a free thinker, and I'm liberal and all of that. And that's just no place for anybody like that in Miami. It's just not the place for that at all. They're just not into that. Paramahansa Yogananda in 1925 was thrown out of Miami. Out of all the cities, all the cities he visited in the United States, they all loved him. They all welcomed him. But in Miami, the mayor and everyone was like, no, you're a love cult, and we're having nothing to do with you, and you're out of here. You know.
Oh my God.
So that explains Miami. I mean, yeah. I mean, 30 like just like so that show in Miami was March 1st, 1969 at Dinner Key Auditorium, and the warrants were issued on March 5th. 5 days later, the FBI office in Miami, they sent a memo directly to J. Edgar Hoover's office saying, listen, this guy exposed himself to the audience. Like, this is, you know, we got to get this guy. And then just a few weeks after that, at the Orange Bowl, there was like 30,000 people, young students, showed up to protest the show, and it was hosted by Jackie Gleason. So that was just that's what happened to Jim Morrison. He went to a place that was like, oh wow, like he just messed up. Here's our opportunity to get him in here, and we can end the Doors' career. We can end him. And you know, I grew up in a very conservative Roman Catholic family. My love for Jim Morrison was very much frowned upon. So I know what Jim Morrison ran into in Miami. I can honestly say that. Right. And you're right. Florida is just like, it's all that kind of, you know, all that kind of weirdness. You know, Miguel, this gave me the thought, like, because I read your book again. You know, like he's just so loved by conservative America. You know, he's just, you know, this is like Jim Morrison is not going to go to the White House and ask to see Nixon. No. But Elvis can go to the White House and ask to see Nixon, and at the same time, like, you know, he's actually like this extraordinary secret teacher, you know, as well. And as I'm thinking more about Jim Morrison since the book came out, I've also been like learning a lot about Elvis. I've always loved Elvis too, and Jim Morrison loved Elvis. Like, he's the one, like I said, who inspired the first biography of Elvis with Jerry Hopkins. You know, Jim Morrison would stay up at night listening to his transistor radio when he was at FSU to Elvis. He turned everybody on to Elvis. He also loved Bob Dylan a great deal. He had a friend listen to all of Bob Dylan's records. Elvis was a very big influence, you know, for Jim Morrison. I think what the difference between the two is that, you know, Elvis was, you could almost see him as kind of like a frat boy that way. I mean, he's nothing like that, of course, but the cut hair, the clean cut image, like the whole thing. And, you know, Jim Morrison, if we're going to talk about archetypes, you know, his is Dionysius, you know, the womanly one, right? So Jim Morrison is completely different from like all of that. Like, you know, this is the Dionysian archetype man does not fit in the male locker room with male locker room talk, you know. Like Elvis can do that and get away with all that. At the same time, though, that I'm realizing that really came to a place in his life where he was a seeker. He wanted to know a lot more about life, and he was reading books and going to doing all kinds of that. The exact opposite of like, you know, your conservative male locker room talk. Although those people, you know, those young men still loved Elvis. You know, I'm because of you, I'm beginning to see Elvis like in a whole new way. And how wild it is that he's that and also the secret teacher, like, you know, at the same time. But Jim Morrison, no, they were out to get him. This person was the son of an admiral. His father actually, you know, got in contact with the Navy and said, "Listen, do you want me to resign because of my son?" That's a big deal. Like they were grooming him like for top slots in the corporation. Like he retired a rear admiral. This is someone who was president at the. I hear a doggy. This is somebody who was present at the Gulf of Tonkin. You know, like the day after Jim. This is wild. Like the day after Jim Morrison passed away on July 3rd, 1971, his father gave the decommissioning speech, you know, to the USS Bonhomme Richard, his first aircraft carrier command. You know, so yeah, I guess, you know, just to go back to Florida and everything like that. That was it all. That's Jim Morrison's home state. Like he was born in Melbourne too, and he hadn't been back to Florida, you know, since he left FSU when he transferred to UCLA, you know, for that show.
I didn't even know that. See, Florida people don't understand.
I don't know.
It's really a microcosm.
Yeah, what I wanted to say too.
But it was it was Charlie Crist. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say about Elvis is you have to remember that he was very much Jim Morrison when he came out. Evangelical Christian denouncement. The FBI had a hard on for. I mean, he pissed off Frank Sinatra and Jackie Gleason, and many of the old Hollywood were like, "We hate this guy. He's a flash in the pan." So he was walking on coals. But I think going back to the warrior archetype, I think the 2 years in the army gave Elvis that creed, like, you know, who's gonna mess me? I've done everything. I've been in the army. I'm a rock star. I'm everything. So I think that's. But yeah, but when Elvis came out, he was public enemy number one for a while. He pissed off a lot of people. So
I think
that was after the Korean War when he went into the army, obviously. Yeah.
58. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, I wonder how Elvis would have reacted if he was Jim Morrison and he could have, you know, get drafted into the army and find Vietnam. It'd be, you know, how.
Yeah, who knows? I don't know.
Well, and isn't that just also a characteristic of the shaman is that they put on whatever clothes they need to get their, you know what I mean? That ability to shapeshift and to walk across boundaries, I think is that's, you know, that's endemic to the shamanic path. But, you know, regarding Florida again, it was interesting to me growing up because, as you said, you know, Florida is an incredibly conservative place. And, you know, it wasn't any reflections on hidden realities weren't really welcome. But that being said, you know, one thing that I observed was that, you know, with my father's generation, with the boomers and that, you know, with the people that had been involved in the war and didn't really want to talk about it, but also weren't willing to, you know, become hippies or critics of the United States. You know, whatever that worked on them was so unhealthy, was so damaging. And again, as this relates to Generation X, so my dad was a jet mechanic in the Air Force and worked on B-52s. So he fixed the planes that dropped bombs on civilians. That's what he did. He made sure, like, what does that do to your psyche, to realize that that was what you did. That's what you enabled. And, he and his group of friends that were Vietnam veterans, they got into some not good stuff, so you had, and this was to me what I saw in Florida, and I think was sort of, again, a microcosm of the wider culture. You had people who profess this standard Christianity, this conservative whatever, but they're not living any of it. They are living free. They are cowboys, in Florida especially, the drugs, oh my God. And I don't mean be enlightened and do LSD and write your journal. I mean, get freaking high and cause mayhem, drugs, and it was just, Florida was just, there was a wash in drugs. And that was especially true from what I observed with my father and the whole Vietnam veteran. They were Magnum PI. Okay. So here, let's talk about Gen X. Magnum PI, when I was watching it as a kid, was an entertaining show. I didn't realize until years later, watching it as an adult, that this was about three men who could never come home. This is about three Vietnam veterans who were so traumatized by their experience that they couldn't come home, they couldn't grow up, they couldn't have functional relationships. And actually that show went way in deep into mind control and government. I watched it over again. I'm like, holy crap, they were saying a lot there. But again, I didn't realize that this was saying, why did my dad like this show? Because that's the life he was living. That's the life that he and his friends were actually living. They go to church on Friday, they wave the flag, or on Sunday, they wave the flag, they do whatever. Not the lifestyle they're living, and then with the hippies that are now the yuppies, it's like they're not living their lifestyle either. They're part of the man, they're part of the system now. So no one's living authentic lives. And this is what, the last night's talk that I did on Parsifal, and that Campbell identified, that the problem of the wasteland is the world of people living inauthentic lives. And I think as people who are, grew up as Generation X, that was one of our primary observations. We were like, no. This is all inauthentic. It's not real.
Sold out. Yeah. You sold out. You sold out. You sold out.
You sold out.
I think Vietnam. Yep. Like Vietnam, my dad was in Vietnam too. He didn't fight. He knew French. My father's side of the family is French. My dad's fluent in French. So the French were in Vietnam first. They had him work as an adjutant at the embassy in Saigon in 1962. And then, my poor dad had to go to work watching the Buddhists set themselves on fire in front of his office. He took high film of that. In our history books, it says we had nothing to do with the coup that ousted President Diem. My dad's like, that's fucking bullshit. I watched him plan the whole thing. I put Secretary of Defense McNamara in a Jeep, and I drove him to Tonson at Air Base. I went to the palace with my camera and I filmed it because I knew it was going to break out. And then he said, then the bizarre thing is that 3 weeks later, the president was killed. And it was all, and then all my uncle said, when your dad came back, he was only in Vietnam for a year at the embassy. But my uncle's like, when your dad came back, he was not the same person at all. So Vietnam was something that changed a lot of young men in a way that was not very natural to change at that young of an age in life, for sure.
No. And then there was there's nothing to be proud of, right? So we grew up as children of parents that were involved in a war where there was nothing to be proud of. Our grandparents were, the greatest generation, the World War II, and we can talk about that. But, I think that set a theme of this inauthenticity and maybe gave us, for the people who wanted to wake up and who are aware, this radar for inauthenticity, and seeing it kind of everywhere. But, I've heard, I read it somewhere, and I can't remember exactly where it was, but it just so resonated with me. They call Gen X the sandwich generation because the boomers, those poor people, they got worked over, right? They were the most comfortable, right? The highest level, highest standard of living, the most I mean, the whole myth of America was intact for them in this way, and then they just pile on the comfort and the money, and this is how things are, and then they just suck out the moral code, right? The ethical structure. Not saying it was great, not saying there weren't problems with it, but then you remove all of the guardrails. You have all of these comforts, you have all of this, technology, whatever, to make yourself, have to work as little as possible, basically. Then you remove all the ethical guardrails, and it's just a fucking free for all. And that's how they behaved by and large. They by and large behaved like hedonists, whether they were hippies or not.
Right.
We've got a baby boomer in the White House now. And
they won't let go. They won't let go of power, right? I mean, we're still we're not. So I mean, I went on the segue, but the sandwich generation being that our parents, as you put in that first slide, what did you just say? Insane parents? Is that what you said, Miguel? Yeah. Insane parents, right?
Yeah,
they were there. They were living this eternal adolescence. Just it was me. And then we're the parents of millennials. And as you said,
you can blame Dr. Benjamin Spock in his book that all those parents read back when these kids were born between 45 and 1950. That book, I think, had a lot to do with a great deal to do of many things that how those kids came to see life.
Sleeping alone in the cradle, women are alone giving birth without their husband. Yeah, it was
so
evil how they treated it.
But,
breast milk is bad, all that shit. Yeah.
You pointed out that they put this slackers. That's about our generation. No, that's not us at all. We were hustlers. Every person I know was really hustling. They had 3 or 4 things going on. They did so many different. And then our children, I'm the children of millennials, so then the millennials come along, and now we're deep into techno hell. And now we are actually into slacker land. So we have parents who didn't raise us, and we have children who didn't want to hustle. And we're kind of torn in both ways, parents who haven't figured out, what they want to do at the end of their lives. There's no plan. We have to take care of our parents, which is fine. We should, but in a way that it's not because that's a proper familial relationship. It's because they wanted to live like adolescents till the day they died.
It's almost like we're leading back up to a lot of these young people, and they're going to be the next great generation. Because I talked to the 21, 22, 23-year-olds that I talk to, the intelligent ones, they're there's too many fucking choices. We're just assaulted. There's just too much that is twisted. There's too much that is inverted. There's just too much that's not authentic. And they're pushing back. That is happening.
That's what I believe that's true. And that's what I'm seeing with, like I said, doing these talks. These young people in their 20s showing up saying, I'm really interested. I wonder what this is. I'm you're taking 2 hours out of your Friday night to come and listen to some person talk. Okay, something just shifted here. I believe that that's true. Absolutely. That
I think there's just a pervasive emptiness that is going across the country right now. I hear about the suicide rate among teenage girls, for instance, and I'm horrified by stuff like that. They're dying for something that is spiritually healthy for them. They're dying to just soak up something that really turn on to life, other than their cell phones and going to parties where everybody is just on their smartphones. We're lucky. We are the last generation where, Liam Gallagher was saying this. He's like we're fucking lucky. Rock is dead because we're the last great band. Everyone doesn't come with their fucking smartphone. It's and you go to a concert just to rock out with your friends and have a great time and participate in this great Dionysian experience. I saw the Rolling Stones for the first time over the summer twice. It was great. But I have my cell phone on me, and I've got this compulsion. I've got to take some video and all that. But most of me is I just want to do what I've always done since I was a kid and just have a really great time, rather than just be a witness. I want to participate. I think they're wanting to come back to a place It's very primitive. It's a very ancient thing within us. It's a very Dionysian thing. You want to participate in something that is transformational, that is emotional, that you share with your friends, that you remember for your life. And that's coming back, I think.
I believe that as well. We were, as you said, we were lucky where, we weren't habituated to that from the cradle. And so, I don't want technology to go away. I love the fact that we can sit here and have this talk, but it's a tool to me. It's just it's a part of everything. And I don't have a conflict in my mind of, oh, how can I get off this thing? I'm so, no, I don't want to be around this thing. It's a good tool. I like that part of it, but the core of my life is not that. I don't have to fight against that. Whereas the succeeding generation, they're having to actually, that's a conflict within them, where they don't understand that this is a tool. It can blow your brain out, or it can, help you communicate. It's your choice. But as you said, we've gotten to this freaking dead end where there's nothing happening, until you turn that off, until you sit, in communion with other people in assembly and feeling this human presence. That is a completely different experience, and it's intoxicating, right?
That's what Steve Jobs wanted. Like one day I'm like, I need to learn about Steve Jobs. I want to learn about the person that invented this thing that I use all the time. And what I've learned, this man was practically the secret teacher of the tech world. I mean, Jim Morrison grew up experiencing an actual renaissance in the San Francisco Renaissance with Lawrence Ferlinghetti and Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, and that in San Francisco. And Steve Jobs, when he was a kid, he experienced like a great technological renaissance in the Silicon Valley, and he made it part of his mission to create technology to further the humanities so we could do things like this. I think also at the same time, he was probably just like, floored that this also has its dark side, and that, it was social media and pornography and all this other stuff was going to come along with this. And, he couldn't, really do anything about that. I mean, this is somebody that went to India, had an amazing life transformational experience. A lot of how he designs his products is based on his study of Zen. He made everyone who works at Apple, like, mandatory reading was Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi. So this technology was generated by somebody who was a secret teacher pretty much in themselves with their influence in their mind. But yeah, you gotta put these things down. Like, this generation, I think, this new generation is learning perspective on this. They're like the smart ones, the mature ones, the artistic ones, the creative ones. They're learning how to be warriors themselves and staking out a place in this new space that did not exist when we grew up. The fuck was cyberspace? Like, all that existed in Blade Runner and Philip K. Dick. Cyberspace is this new place, and they're staking out a place in there where they're as a form to be their authentic selves, and they're starting to reject all the lifestyles that they see on Instagram, all these like super famous, super wealthy people living these very these lives that have just nothing to do with who they are, far away from who they are, like with all these material things that most of us will never ever have, that they flaunt on Instagram. So they're starting to reject all of that. We rejected all of that too when we were growing up in in the 80s. We did those same things in our way. Like, we were seeking authenticity in our own way. Like, human being is very different. It's so overwhelming. It's just the voices that are coming at them from so many different directions, right? And like, and how I guess so. Like, so if you're a creative person with the internet, it's a democratic playing field now. If you want to like get your music out there, you can. Well, not everybody can be a successful musician. Before the internet, if you want to get signed to a label, like, you better be fucking good, or else executives are not going to sign you. Now today, it's a lot of work for really truly creative people with talent, with the craft and the technical ability to get themselves noticed, because they're being drowned out by people who get 1 million, 2 million, 10 million likes and followers on Instagram just because they're sexy, and that's it. They don't do anything. That's very difficult to compete with if you're looking.
That's sexy. That's what I do.
Yeah,
Well,
it's like Bob Dylan's profile on Instagram has like a million followers, and you get on Timothy Chalamet, like the actor that just portrayed him, like his profile, like he's got 60 million followers. It's like, wow, you know.
Let me stop you for a second. Yeah, for the audience, don't forget, if you want to call in, please call in 434-532-9370. We got a good crowd, so I know you must have questions. Ray, nobody's called, or do you have a question or comment? Let's bring you in if you're on.
Yeah, let me ask you a question. About Dave McGowan. You know who I'm talking about? Or Paul, you familiar with him?
Is that the guy that about the whole something in the canyon with MK Ultra and all that?
Yeah, Weird Tales in Laurel Canyon. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, the weird scenes.
Cherlyn brought it up too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was just wanting to know, what you thought about that, because all those people like Frank Zappa and Crosby and all those were connected with these high-profile people and like the deep intelligence.
So I've read that book. That's a great question, and it's an important one because, first of all, Jim Morrison was not like an MK Ultra Manchurian candidate artist. That just is not true. It is interesting that these people who were big figures in the 60s came from military families with high intelligence clearances. It's interesting that the U.S. government and the military had a base, there in Laurel Canyon, where people like Joni Mitchell had security clearances to go and visit. That's weird. But as far as Jim Morrison goes, like if this is someone who wanted to stay as fucking far away from all that as possible. He was not into being controlled at all. The only thing that he put in control was cosmic consciousness, his own divine alignment, and all those beautiful sacred things that secret teachers are into. That's Jim Morrison. Now, to go back with that book and MK Ultra and all this, so I became friends in a wild synchronistic way. There's so many synchronicities like you experienced, Miguel, with writing about Elvis that I've had with Jim Morrison. One of them was meeting Tom O'Neill, who wrote Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 1960s. And like his guy Manson, came across my guy, Jim Morrison. Like Dennis Wilson and the Beach Boys is good friends with Jim Morrison, and saw him one day in the car with Charles Manson. Nobody really knew who Charles Manson was going to be. They just thought he was just a strange, bizarre character. But Jim was driving him in his Mustang to Terry Melcher's house, a producer. And Neil Young actually tried to get Charles Manson like a record deal with Reprise Records.
Right.
So to me, Tom O'Neill's book is the only book that responsibly talks about MK Ultra, through the context of Charles Manson and that whole trial. Tom spent 20 years writing this book, right? Great interview on Rogan about all of this. Manson was in prison from 60 to 67. They released him. His handlers in prison, his parole officers, the mysterious way that he got off of all of his arrests, wasn't thrown back into prison, that his handlers were former CIA operatives who were involved in MK Ultra when the whole lid was blown in the 70s, with Richard Helms and all of them, and that came out in, I think it was 73. Tom O'Neill presents a very compelling argument that this person was turned into something to manipulate people to commit heinous crimes, and that there was a cover-up involved, and it involved Vincent Bugliosi and everything about all of that. So this is all an interesting parallel and intersection with everything going on in Laurel Canyon. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about artists, MK Ultra or anything having to do with that would infiltrate like an artist out to make people do crazy things or anything like that. I think that's a stretch. The CIA tried to use LSD as a truth in the beginning, and that backfired. What was happening is that they were giving LSD to their agents, and they were having experiences. They found God, and they were like, "Fuck this! I'm leaving the agency. I'm out here." And then they did those experiments in San Francisco, where they were like, with their peepholes and with prostitutes that lure people in hotel rooms and get them, dose them on LSD, just observe them, like all that kind of stuff. And then finally, LSD was just out. They can't control it, so they outlawed it altogether. In California on October 6, 1966. So to go back to your question, it's an interesting book, but to me, the book really doesn't make that strong it's just filled with like, it kind of left me saying to myself, well, that's all very interesting, but not much there to chew on, to take too seriously, I guess.
You know, in that book, something that put a piece together for me, because as you say, the book itself, and Dave McGowan said, from the interviews I heard, he said himself, I don't have a theory. I don't know what they were doing or weren't doing. I'm just pointing out this is weird. Like this piece and this piece are weird. I heard an interview with, I don't want to get too far afield, but it's an organization called Veterans for Peace. They're having their national conference or yearly conference somewhere here in the inland Northwest years ago. And it was a journalist who was a veteran. And he said, I have photos and now you can't find them. But this was I think Dave McGowan does point this out a little bit, that initially the protests and the counter argument to the Vietnam War was it was organized, it was sober, it was middle class people, it was educated people. You know, it was a real debate. It was a real honest debate, sober debate that was taken seriously. And he said, I have pictures that you now cannot find. They're not on the internet. You have to go to these archives. Some of these archives have even been scrubbed of military personnel in uniform protesting the Vietnam War in the early 60s. At one point, they had over 1,000 people walk out of Camp Pendleton in Marine uniform protesting the war. I mean, it was serious. They were going to lose this argument big time. This war was not going to happen. People were saying no. But these photographs, you can't even find them because they have been scrubbed. They have been hidden. Like, nobody wants you to know about this history. But as soon as people started doing drugs and taking their clothes off and growing their hair out, now you can dismiss them. You know, no one, I know what I don't want to be. I don't want my kid to be that. So I'm going to support the war. It's what they do with everything, right? They divide it into these stupid categories that everybody has to choose a side. Like, well, I'm not this, I'm that. So until I heard that interview with somebody who had actually gone and done archival research and had physical photographs, that this was happening nationwide. And that the powers that be were going to lose this argument, and they knew it. That it started making sense to me as to why this, that perhaps I can't tell you who was in charge of it or where the money came from, but it would make sense that, you just sort of unleash the freaks and the drugs and scare the shit out of everyone. and now you're going to get your war, So anyway, that was just something I had heard, fairly recently that I never knew before.
Well, that's such a, Gary Lackman talks about this where, I mean, the war having happened in the context of the 1960s and like this great occult awakening that happened across the West, like, so you have, I mean, when Harry S. Truman invited Winston Churchill to the United States to speak, in Missouri, when Truman was beginning to realize that Churchill was right, that Stalin is seeking to drop this iron curtain and to start taking over with communism. Everybody back then, they viewed Joseph Stalin as Uncle Joe. He helped us beat Hitler. Nobody really realized in early 50s America who Joseph Stalin was until Churchill comes to Missouri and is like, you people need to wake up as to what this man is and what is going on over there. Nobody understood the pogroms. Nobody understood Jewish persecution. Nobody knew about the famines in places like Ukraine and the gulags and all of that kind of stuff. So that slowly but surely came to a place when Eisenhower's administration and leading to JFK, where like Americans were like, holy shit, we need to wake up and stop communism. So I can see why things like Korea and Vietnam happened. A lot of good people in the government and the military were legitimately like, we have to stop this shit. This can't encroach on us. At the same time, you have, after World War II, the Western esoteric tradition kind of picks back up again. There's people forgetting about the war. They don't want anything to do with war. There's the baby boomer generation. Jim Morrison makes the point that the only reason that makes rock and roll possible is this surfeit of goods, this great economy that we have. Because America became this great economic power after World War II, following the Bretton Woods Agreement and all of that kind of stuff. And Jim Morrison was acutely aware of like what allowed the doors and all of this stuff to take place. So at the same time, all these people are having these beautiful spiritual awakening experiences, and everybody is opening up to the occult world and everything like that. You got to remember that this capitalist economy is allowing all of this to happen, and there's people involved in that and want to make sure that this communism doesn't encroach. Now, why people got involved in Vietnam, I don't know. I mean, it was General Giap who told the Secretary of Defense McNamara, like, I don't know why you guys came to fight. This wasn't a fight about communism. We've been fighting the Chinese for 1,000 years, and you came and you got involved. We handed you your ad. You shouldn't have gotten involved. In the same way, I don't think we should be getting involved in Ukraine either. That's a whole other thing. So the Vietnam War and everything that was going on there in the 60s with everybody their consciousness exploding, and there's a really good book called The Occult Explosion that goes into this that I talk about in my own book. That's all extraordinary that way. We're still in that same place where we are flirting with World War III. We are. Like this summer is the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. First in Europe and then in Japan, and we're no longer in a unipolar world. It's a multipolar world. It's Russia and it's Iran and it's China, and it's us and it's NATO and Europe, and things are really, really dicey. Now we're going through this all over again. At the same time, we seem to be moving into a place where people are waking up. We're heading towards another kind of renaissance. At the same time that AI is rising, people don't realize with AI, we are literally witnessing the birth of a god. We're listening. The reason why they want to go get Greenland is they want to have a place where people don't have to power up that much energy to cool off those servers. Just build those data centers over there. When Google goes to the government and asks for permit to build 3 nuclear power plants, what the fuck are they trying to power up? This is all we saw the internet happen these past 40 years. We all had our Apple desktops there in 1983, 84. Look where we are now. I think we're going to get to a place that it took 40 years for us to be able to do this with all the technology you can have. With AI, what's happening now, I think it's going to be a quarter amount of that time. I think 2030, 2035, the world is going to be nothing like we see it right now. And there's going to have its good sides and there's going to have its bad sides, with all of that. Just like with the rise of television in the 60s, right? So
it feels like getting back to that apocalyptic sort of milieu that we had when we were kids, again, like the nuclear winter movies and it's all going to end, and duck and cover, get under your desk, and we're going to have World War III, and then it just push, and then one day it's, oh yeah, okay, it's done, never mind, not going to do that, just forget about it. But it feels like we're back in this sort of moment where now it's push, and as you were saying, about young folks waking up and this sort of AI apocalypse, revealing. And Jason Reza Georgiani bringing this up on your show recently about, this is going to be an aggressive culling. If you haven't already figured out that this thing is a tool and you better set your own path and make it your tool, you're not going to survive this. You're going to, and I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if that means literally plugged into a matrix. I don't know if that means you just, gain 200 pounds and die young because you never stand up anymore. I don't know.
The movie WALL-E.
Yeah, I don't know what that means, but I do know that when I see robotic behavior out of people and we're not all microchipped before we're all microchipped, I just see sort of this bifurcation of the culture where I can't imagine that people who haven't already staked out their own agency will be able to functionally survive a world where they don't have to make any decisions. I mean, look what that did to our parents. Look what it did to the boomer generation. They took away all of this agency. all this work that they had to do. Now they live these lives of comfort and affluence. Well, you just become a teenager for the rest of your, not everybody, but again, it's a culling. So I think it's going to get quite aggressive shortly. And I read this study recently. I don't know if either of you all saw it, but it was a study that said somewhere 30 to 50% of people have no internal dialogue.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Whoa.
Wow.
Whoa.
But can you wait a minute? Can you elaborate on that? That sounds really.
I don't know. I think we could probably easily research it. But where the study came from, but people that 30, some great percentage of people are not self-reflecting. They're just reacting.
I can see that.
I don't know how that's possible. Like my cat, there's no metacognition. It's just eat, walk. There's no I want to eat, and and I got to go outside to the litter box. So.
Well, I mean, if kids are not taught, if kids are not taught critical thinking in school, like the way that we did, then that they're just not going to think. They're just going to do whatever they're told, and they're going to have knee-jerk reactions. Whether in all across the entire political spectrum. I think like hard right MAGA is just as evil as hard left woke. Like I stay away from all of it. I find all of it to be. If you told us back in 1989 that Donald Trump or Joe Biden would be president, we'd have thought you're fucking crazy. Like Donald Trump was the guy I tell my young friends, like, listen, you seen that movie Wall Street? Oliver Stone based his character on Donald Trump, the evil Gordon Gekko.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then I tell them also, like, look, in 1989 was like the 88 election. I was 18 years old, and that was when Dukakis was running against, who was it, Bush? But Joe Biden, he tried to run in that election. He had to drop out of the election because his lies were so bad. It was just so. It was just so embarrassing.
Plagiarizing books and dropping the N-word, like you can't make shit,
and the fact that they're exchanging roles in the White House now is like, that tells you where we're at.
Yeah.
That it's just
will not give up. They're not giving up power. And as you said, we were taught to think critically, and what I love about Gen X and the music, at least on the the alternative or punk rock side, or that it was questioning all of this. As you said, like if you would have told us in 1989 that this woke ideology or this hard right nationalist, we would go, no, gross. It was fuck the man, not go for this political party. I mean, I can't remember any political rally or candidate. I was telling Miguel, I worked in live music for 3 years, 1995. Well, it was longer than that, 95 to about 99, in some capacity. And we were bringing some of the best independent acts in the world to Florida, which, I mean, you may remember this, but people didn't used to come south of Atlanta. They were like, no, why? Why would I do it? They probably learned their lesson from Jim Morrison, right? Well, at least the independent acts, But anyhow, within that whole scene, the politics were fuck the man. That was the extent of the politics. Everybody's got it out for you. There isn't a party you can go to that's going to represent your interests. And so to see it to watch this evolution into these various political parties, and for me, to see the progressive ideals of, you don't want war, you don't want corporations running things, you don't want government control, to then be flipped on its head. And there's no party that represents that, there's none. So we're in
a very, very dangerous time, because I found lots of parallels. I'm not saying Trump is Hitler at all, but there are parallels between, Trump and Hitler. I learned the other day that some guy jumped out in front of Hitler during the beer hall putsch and took 11 bullets from him, and like Hitler lived. It's the same thing, like happened with Trump, and Hitler said, like, told all of Germany that I believe that was an act of God, that my life was saved by God to make Germany great again. And I saw the documentary, like, oh, holy shit. and that he was trying to fool all of Europe by saying he's all about peace. He wants peace. And Trump is doing the same thing now. I'm not saying that's who he is, but I think we have to pay attention. I mean, Hitler threw out the communists, and you can say to some extent that this election kind of threw out, you know, Harris and all them that people accuse of being like thinly veiled Marxism and such. You know, they have, you know, Musk in there with directing all these investments in this AI infrastructure that they want to build. They're trying to do all kinds of things in the Middle East that are brand new. Like, I don't know where all this is leading, but anyway.
Well, definitely the influences are the same of, you know, with World War I, World War II, with all of the wars, where you see the same banking families, the same institutions funding both sides. You know, so you see all this conflict on the surface and all these people doing this and these people doing that, but the same people are getting rich behind the scenes no matter who's in charge. And it's like, until people are willing to step back from these, again, the simple divisions, you know, I mean, you have a reasonable, measured conversation about a war, and then you drop a bunch of naked, you know, drug using hippies into it, and all of a sudden, you know, I don't want to be that, you know, let's have the war. And I'm not saying it's that simple, but they always cast us into these really simple divisions. And it's like, anybody who's lived any amount of time knows that life's not like that. Life isn't these two simple divisions. It's incredibly complex and nuanced and gray, and every decision has, we were talking about this last night with the Grail Quest, every decision has both black and white, both good and evil. That's all within us. Anybody who's lived any amount of time knows that. But then when it comes to politics, people will just deliver their agency, you know, and say, oh, okay, well, you know, it's all just that way for the purposes of today. When they know, you know, authentically, that is not true. But it's the answer or the alternative is so much more complex. You know, what would lives of self-agency that were sustainable, where people had actual liberty and freedom, what would that look like? And what would that take for us to execute? The level of responsibility that would require out of individuals is huge. And it's systematically sort of bred out of the culture over at least the past 5 or 6 generations, to where now people can't, you know, they can't organize a fucking yard sale. So
it's,
you know, work makes them cry. They need marshmallow. They need, you know, hot chocolate and coloring books, you know, for, you know, getting offended for, again, like the offense thing is so funny to me because, you know, looking back at the music, like, offend me, make me feel something, you know, let's do this. Let's debate this out here. And to not have that, I feel like our generation has a really thick skin, you know, and we kind of look at either the woke monster or the intolerant religious monster and go, what are you doing? Why?
So can we all like agree that us Gen Xers, like, it's just, to me, it just seems like it's getting harder to tell who are the good guys and who are the bad guys, that things are kind of like blending. It's almost like it's like when the Roman Republic fell, like it just all fell into Augustus. Like he just became this embodiment of, like, you know, all the past, like, you know, leaders of the Roman Republic. I feel like we're moving towards our first Augustus. I mean, when I see, like, you know, Christy Dome go down south, or like this woman who's in charge of Homeland Security is posing in front of, like, you know, prisoners behind, hey, this is where you're going. You know, like everything that they're doing right now is very dangerous, because the more power that the Oval Office gets, the more power that they can just start putting everybody in jail in the way that they want to.
Yeah.
And I just kind of see this coming. Like, it's not just about, you know, immigrants and illegals and getting the crime off the street and all of that. Like, that could lead to just doing away with a lot of people that everyone's like, well, we want to get rid of them too. We want to get rid of the secret teachers. We want to get rid of the awakened people. We want to get rid of all these other people. Like, I just see all of this is kind of dangerous. Like the degenerate artists, like in the way that Hitler saw all those people back then.
Yeah. That's
something's telling me to stay on our toes.
That was a very bad thing, man. I mean, it was like really hard to look at with that, like, with Christy Nome standing there in front of those prisoners as a backdrop, knowing.
I
that
mean,
those prisoners,
even what's her name? Megyn Kelly thought it was a really bad idea.
it was horrible.
Just weird, you know. And I agree with you, Paul. You know,
Yeah,
that
weird.
It's hard to get. It is hard to sort out, again, good guys from bad guys. And when you're living in a world where, you know, I use this analogy where, so I've been making my own food, you know, making my own bread and been into organic farming and sustainable living for going on 30 years now. So 20 years ago, when I would talk to people about that stuff, they'd say, "Oh, you're a hippie. You're a hippie." You know, like, well, no, I don't. No, I'm not. I just want to be healthy, and I think I want to live in a world where I'm not poisoned. I don't really know what you mean by I'm a hippie, you know. But now, when I talk about this stuff, they think I'm a right-wing extremist prepper, and I'm like, wait a minute, what the fuck?
One extreme to the other.
What are we talking? I'm doing the same thing, you know, but we're having these ideologies, you know, defined by others and try to put in all these classes. So it's really hard to criticize, to have a rational conversation and engage with critical thinking without people knee-jerking into, you know, if I criticize one thing, then I'm a MAGA person. And if I criticize this other thing, then I'm a left-wing Marxist. And it's like, how does this, until you can stop knee jerking, but I do see it being unbalanced in this way. And I agree with Paul, is that, you know, people who have a non-traditional, a more open religious view, I see us as supporting all these different sides, you know, saying, no, I don't want the government telling me what to do. I don't want, so that looks more Republican, but we also we believe in, you know, these religious ideas or spiritual ideas that aren't necessarily, you know. Paul dropped off. You see that?
All right. Yeah, I think I got him. Let's see. Did he run out of power? There you go. Paul's back. Oh, wait. We got a phone call.
Hi there.
We can hear you.
Okay. Hey, I'm just listening to the whole conversation, which is really fascinating. I'm a boomer, 59. I miss the 60s, I guess. And I was raised on Walter Cronkite, kind of talking about body count and Vietnam and kind of being blown through life sideways. And I think what it gets down to is when I was raised, there was more of anything's possible. Mm-hmm. And then you just sort of found your way. I mean, my parents were basically absent and doing what they were doing. But I think that what makes life meaningful is to look at what was going on with Jim Morrison or Elvis, getting kind of inspiration on the periphery. But unless you get into the biology, the organic matter of living, and rather than theorizing, I think that's what makes things really rich. And I've kind of backed my way. I ended up living in Manhattan and Paris, and it was a time when doors could just open up. It didn't matter who you necessarily knew or what connections or how you were raised or educated. But I think that now what the connection that we're missing is to take all of that, you know, everything that Miguel's doing, everything from Elvis, everything from the Doors, and then pulling that in. And right now I own a little farmstead. I own 10 acres yeah, it's way cool. They totally gifted it to me. They're like, poof, you're a farmer. I'm like, oh, all right. But and I have an Airbnb. But I think that unless you get in touch with the earth, if you don't put your hands in the earth, if you can just take all of that theory and see how you can manifest it, like you're a tree in the root in the ground and reaching to the highest point. This is how we can find our truths. This is how we can find the answers, having the wisdom from the past, but also just getting into the organic matter. and maybe a little bit away from the theory. I don't know if that makes sense, but I was compelled to call in, and thanks for taking my call.
Beautifully said and agreed. Yes, yes. Thanks for calling in and appreciate your wisdom.
Yeah, you blew me away. I sent a note to Maureen Callahan. I don't know if you know who she is. She loves Elvis, and I said she needs to check out your book. So we'll see what goes from there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That would be great. Appreciate it. Yeah, yeah. Well,
Oh,
stay in touch. Yeah. Where's your farmstead? You said you're in Florida?
No, I'm in the wine country in Washington State. I'm kind of anyway, yeah, I'm there, and I actually came back home. It's like so many fictional pieces say, "Oh, a death in the family brought someone home." Well, indeed, I was yanked out of Santa Fe and plopped back to my to where I was raised, but I'm making the best of it. But yeah, so Miguel, thanks for everything you're doing, and thanks for having your program there on the YouTubes. And I would recommend to anybody who isn't sure of what they're doing, just get your hands in the soil somehow, in a flower box, a piece of dirt, or a farm, and you'll find your way.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking my call.
Beautifully said. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Somebody's asking on the chat. Thank you. Have a good night. Do you offer Jungian analysis? Good night. Analysis remotely. Cherlyn?
Oh, no, I don't. I'm happy to work with people and connect them with resources. But if you want to do a full-blown Jungian analysis, I would do that with a clinician. I don't do clinical work.
Okay.
So I would definitely recommend them to find a Jungian clinician. But what I wanted to just comment on her statement and say that that to me that ties into what's this coming sort of culling. Again, if you haven't learned that technology is a tool, or if you haven't learned that the earth does heal you, that connection is sacred and necessary, I don't know how you survive that. I don't know how you.
Agreed. Do we have another phone call there, Ray? Or
you got one right now? Go ahead, sir.
All right.
Am I on now? Okay.
Yeah, you're on.
So yeah, I'm like listening to all this, and I've been listening to Miguel's channel for quite a while. I haven't really called in or anything before. I'm a Gnostic myself.
Awesome.
Very illuminated about reality, and the situation we're in right now is like we're at a crossroads between our unconscious cells and our conscious cells, and we're entering a war phase. So if the unconscious side wins, we all become like that. We all become one with the darkness. In other words, we lose our consciousness in the process. The majority wins, the darkness wins. And that could take us to a point where we all mutually annihilate each other with all these nuclear wars and everything. And that's how the demiurge controls us.
Exactly.
Demiurge wants to keep us here. I mean, we are the demiurge. It's in us, as you know.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Since we're all God. And we have that evil in us, and we also have the good in us. The union as well as the polar opposite. We're
exactly.
Like Abraxas we were talking about before.
Yeah.
So this can go any way. And I don't want to be all doom and gloom. It seems that the dark side definitely is winning lately. And I mean, we've been here before for a very long time, infinitely. And we just keep getting mind wiped over and over again, repeating the same cycle. And if we don't get out of this hellish realm that we're in, we're going to end up in the same predicament, going through the whole cycle all over again. And every time we get to a point where we wake up, the demiurge wants to keep us back in our ignorance. And when that happens, you know, it's like we become all unconscious as a all human species. So the best thing we can do is just massive enlightenment. But how can that happen with all this technology and people are just so stuck into social media and hating on each other? That's the exact opposite frequency that we need to not be in, because the frequency of hating each other and pointing at each other and stuff like that, that's pretty much what keeps us in this ignorance. So the question is, how can we all wake up? And I mean, your channel has been pretty good at that, spreading the message. But I've been, you know, in solitude doing this stuff for myself, but my surroundings is just getting darker and darker. So it's like, I don't know what the future holds, because the future is looking really dark to me, the way things are going. And I don't know what you guys have to say about all that's happening lately with politics and wars and genocides and all sorts of stuff. It's just getting real evil, and it's going to get worse and worse, the way that the track that we're on. So what do you guys have to say about all that?
I've talked about it on my show, so I'm going to let Cherlyn and Paul address this. Let's hear their
Go ahead, Cherlyn.
And I'll be right back. I have to, the cat's scratching at the door, so I'll be right back.
Okay. I think
Go ahead.
I think that, so there's a few different ways that I think about this. One is there's this idea from the Indian tradition of the Kali Yuga, that we're at the end of a really dark cycle, a dark age, and that we're coming up. We're inevitably going to come up. But the demiurge, or the dark powers that be, always have the next trick to throw at us. But that there isn't really any other solution but to stand your ground and to do the thing that is the best. And I kind of foresee, the way I was just explaining this bifurcation, that perhaps, and others have seen this before. There was a really interesting book Margaret Atwood wrote probably over 20 years ago called Oryx and Crake. And it's sort of like Brave New World, where, the people that are going to line up and take their protein cubes live, as drone slaves. That's how they live. But the people that don't, live in smaller communities but they basically don't care about them, because they're not part of the system anyway, and they're few in number. And it is sort of a parable for people, I think, who are spiritually awake. We're small in number, and by and large, we go unseen. When those that have put their heads up tend to get seen pretty quickly and taken down. But I'm not sure how we navigate this next, little bit. It's very challenging, but there is no other option but to do it. I mean, that's why we're here. We in my view, we chose to come here for this time. And Paul, I was saying something when we lost you that was relevant to your point, which was, and this has always been a concern for me. So I feel like people who have a more expanded, spiritual understanding, I support the right of all people to practice their religions. I'm adamant about that. I don't challenge people in their religious views. Everybody is where they are for a reason, and they should be where they are for the reasons that they need to be there. And I also, I'm as a parent over a long period of time now, I'm appalled by the attacks on the family and the lack of support that is shown for mothers and for children and for families in general. It's really
Doc,
terrible.
can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear. Can you hear me?
For some reason, I can't hear Cherlyn.
Yeah, I could hear everybody.
Can you? How about now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
What about Paul?
Can you hear now, Paul?
Yeah, I don't know why it's going out.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Cherlyn, you cut out that last part.
Oh yeah, we were losing you
but
earlier.
I don't know why what's happened. So I apologize for that. like I agree with all of that. And first of all the thoughts and the feelings that you just expressed, I mean, I'm right there with you. The world is getting really dark. I mean, when I read about just today, like, six officers in the Harris County Sheriff Department in Houston, like they all committed suicide within 5-6 weeks of each other. And apparently, like, this is going on in police departments all across the United States. Things like that. It is getting dark. And, we need people out there in society that we trust to make sure, like, hell just doesn't, unfold across the land, right? So, to go back to like my book, what I was talking about with Jim Morrison, not to intellectualize like your feelings and your thoughts, because that's the last thing I want to do. But so many people have so many views about what we're moving into. Like in my book, I talk about we're moving into the integral structure of consciousness, which unites all the past, 4 stages of consciousness. And Gene Gebser says like that's going to be a very tough and dark time. We're gone past the Mayan calendar. Like if you're a Thelemite, we're moving into the age of Horus. The crowned and conquering child. Like there's so many people that have these ideas about the kind of future that we're moving into. You have Christian evangelists who say like these are the last of the last days and Revelations is about to happen. And everybody is reaching to a kind of spirituality, I guess, that to see them through what's going to happen here in the next 5 or 10 years. And it is going to be dark. It is going to be tough. God forbid World War III breaks out, but we have to prepare ourselves that might happen. I firmly believe that the kind of civil unrest that we saw in 2020 when Trump was like last president, I think that's going to happen again, and it's going to be quadruple in intensity. I live here in Los Angeles, and I feel it on the streets. Like LA is just not what it was, but like 10 years ago before the pandemic. It feels now more like a prison in some ways. And a lot of people told me the same way, like LA is getting to feel kind of like a prison. And I think that's happening around the country. I think that's happening around the world. I think people are having all kinds of different reactions to that. There's panic, there's anxiety, there's hopelessness, there's increased drug use. There's all kinds of negative ways in which you can deal with the darkness that is going on. So I don't think any of us have any answers. I think we all have no choice right now, but that we're going to go through it. Like we are going to go through this while we're alive. I mean, everyone says, "Oh, it's just so lucky to be born alive right now." I'm like, what in the fuck are you talking about? It's like it's very, it's like the Chinese say, like may you live during interesting times. I'm like, okay, well, this is interesting, but fuck, this is a little too interesting. I mean, when you read about like I mean, it's just like when you read about Dick Cheney voting for Kamala Harris, and there's a Kennedy now who holds a cabinet post in a Republican administration. It's like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah, everything's upside down.
We're right there with you, Guy. I really thanks a lot for coming in and expressing exactly what you just said, because millions of people are feeling this darkness too.
Yeah, get close.
I also wanted to add something. As conscious people, we shouldn't just be watching all this happen to us. We have the power of God within us. We are God, thereby we can make a change with our willpower. So we have to fight. There's no other way out, because if we just allow these overlords, elite, billionaires, technocrats, religious leaders, etc., if we just allow them to continue to do what they're doing, then that is what they're going to do. They're going to kill us all off because they don't need us anymore, since they have their AI robots and all this technology. Now humanity is more of a problem for them than a benefit, because we have scarce resources. Population is too high. Climate change, all these problems. They want to kill us all, to be honest. Yeah. So, and I mean, they reveal this too. Even the Chabad Lubavitch. If you listen to the rabbis speak, they talk about they have to reset everything. Everything needs to be destroyed for their new world order to come. And since they have the power, since they're the ones that control Elon Musk, Trump, all these billionaires, I mean, we can't just allow that to happen. We have to fight back. We can't just watch this anymore. Fear and cowardice is what brought us here.
I heard someone
And
say,
lack of knowledge, lack of knowledge is the main thing. People need to wake up to what's happening here. That we are at a point where they're going to just annihilate us all for their new world order to come through. So that's the message I'm trying to give out, is for everybody to wake up that not everything is as rosy and new age, and not everything is bright. There's a lot of darkness. There's a lot of evil stuff happening. People need to wake up and fight against this horrible system that they're trying to put on us, and also the fact that they're trying to kill us all off. And they're doing that with the food. They're doing that with the technology. There's just so many ways they're trying to kill us, and they are killing us right now. So that's the point. That's my view on it.
Well,
we can either watch
this
happen to us, or we can fight back. You know, that we all have to fight together, though. That's my point.
Well, thank you for sharing. Thank you very much. Yes. Your job is to wake up, go on your hero's journey, know thyself. That's how we win the same journey 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago, and the wisdom of Paul and Cherlyn, of course, goes with it. But yeah, know thyself, wake up. That's it. You have your hero's journey.
You know, I heard somebody say, I can't remember who it was years ago, the number one way, if you want to fuck the man, grow a garden. I mean, wake up spiritually. Yes, wake up spiritually. But if you want to fight, you want to really fight back, you grow your own food. You know, you take this power of that. I mean, because you know, when people can't eat, that's when they'll do just about anything. And so I really feel like, you know, this process of spiritual awakening then shows you, okay, where can I take back my self-agency? Where have I abdicated these things in my life? And it's one of the number one ways that he's waving his hand.
Yeah,
I'm sending a caller online. Yeah,
one more caller, and we better wrap it up because we're going on more than 2 hours. Appreciate it there, Ray. Yeah, one more caller.
Go ahead, sir.
Hello there. Good evening, all. This is Anonymous here.
The man himself, Anonymous. Good to hear from you.
I just want to kind of expand upon what the last caller had talked about. And there's definitely a battle of the bulge going on, and I feel like it's the Archon's battle of the bulge. They're feeling pressure. And on a positive note, we have to look at some of the better things that are going on out there. For example, look at social media. How many people are kind of becoming aware of Gnosticism?
Right.
I'm sorry, we weren't talking about Gnosticism as teenagers. Most people were even unaware of it. And granted, a lot of the talk of Gnosticism is becoming some form of syncretism, or not necessarily going into depth of it, but at least people are becoming more aware of it. And even with what's going on with the technocrats and the billionaires, a lot of people are aware of this. And things are coming to a head, but there is resistance against this stuff that's going on, and we have to recognize that. Stuff takes time. Change takes time. So I think we have to keep a positive outlook on some of this stuff. And yeah, believe me, the world gets me down sometimes too, but there's enough people out there who are still trying to keep things going, and going inward, as you said, is probably the best way to do this. We'll get through this. It's going to be a struggle, but we'll get through this.
Appreciate it. And I agree. I mean, facts are the facts. Statistically, we're in a time of very low wars and genocide, probably less than any time in history. So it doesn't mean tomorrow the bombs won't fly, you know what I mean? But there is good. There is good. There is light everywhere. So yeah, thanks for the reminder.
Thank you.
So awesome. Well, we better wrap it up. This has been an incredible conversation. We've gone to all the good places, all the dangerous places, and all the high and low places. But we've covered, and I think we've spread a lot of light and opened a lot of doors of perception. And you can love me 2 times for that one. But yeah, we better wrap it up. I guess I better say, Ray, as always, thanks for keeping us company, providing your wisdom, and taking them phone calls.
It's my pleasure, brother.
Appreciate it. And then I will say, Cherlyn, it's awesome to talk to you here, even though we talk in other places. I, of course, am looking very much to your presentation on Aeon Byte when the time is right. It's going to be blowing. And yeah, it was awesome having you on.
Thank you.
And last, Paul, thanks for joining us for the second time, and really liked everything as always, and really like talking with you.
Thanks for having me on again. Luck with your book coming. Setting.
Thanks, man. Yeah, and I do have your website, paulwyld.com, wild.com, sorry. So check it. Cherlyn, you're off the grid, right? Except for Twitter.
No, I have my website, landnomwarrior.org.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And then I have, but yeah, the Twitter X is a good place. The recent talks that I've done,
Yeah.
both on there, and the third one will be on there here next month. So, and after I get that one done, then we can regroup on a show. So it's great to meet you, Paul. I'm really looking forward to reading your book. I'm so stoked to read your book.
Thank you.
It's a great
Thank
read. Ooh, it's a great read. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. You'll learn so much beyond Jim. You'll learn so much about how the Western esoteric tradition.
Very, very, very lucky that I could. I'm very, very lucky that I could add this way. This person's love. So thanks.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I'll have the Elvis and the Jim right there. And so I'm going to do them back to back.
You're going to have a great time. Awesome. Well, appreciate everybody being here. And the next show will actually be next Tuesday. We are going to go on a deep dive of Elvis and his astrological chart and his astrology. So I know people are excited about that one because female Elvis fans are always into astrology and tarot. So it's going to be a passionate show, and our guest is going to break down every event with Elvis with the stars and everything. So that'll be Tuesday evening. So hope to see you guys there. And until then, yes, have a good rest of your weekend. And yeah, keep waking up and keep going inward and keep finding your inner shaman. As Paul Levy says, we are all shamans in waiting. Good night, everybody.